The dust has settled on the Rouleau Commission, and whether you agree with his conclusion or not, that's for history. But there are some long-standing implications from that. And I'm joined now by Geoff Turner, who's a tax lawyer in the City of Toronto. And in fair disclosure, you were a Conservative candidate.
Indeed, I was.
Election, and you may be again. We don't know
about that.
I hope to
be again.
But let's just talk about the Rouleau Commission. You read it. What do you think about some conclusions of other people saying it lowered the threshold for invoking the Emergencies Act?
Yes, and it might well have done that, but first I'd like to say that it's a remarkably gripping story that Justice Rouleau has put together. I mean,
he got the facts.
He did, and he put together all that testimony, and he's put it together in what is essentially a novel of the history of this whole incident in Canada. It's a gripping story, and it's comprehensive, and he did it all in 300 days, which is a very impressive achievement, so good on him.
Did he lower the threshold?
Well, I think the threshold remains very high, as it should be.
Yes.
But I would have reached a different conclusion from what he did based on the facts that were put to him.
And he did say in a press conference, he said any other person could have reached a different conclusion.
He did, because he only just barely said that the invocation of the Emergencies Act was appropriate.
Right.
He struggled to reach that conclusion. And
you think if you had been sitting as a commissioner, you would have had a different conclusion?
Well, based on the facts that he put forward, because, one of the things that's required is a threat to the security of Canada if we're going to have a emergency that rises to the level of a public order emergency.
Right.
And CSIS concluded that there wasn't a threat to the security of Canada for purposes of their remit, and yet they reached an inconsistent different conclusion for purposes of the Emergencies Act. It was inconsistent.
And most people know that the Windsor-Detroit place was open, Alberta was settling down, Ottawa was settling down, so by the time they invoked it, things were pretty well over.
And you had the RCMP commissioner who had expressed doubts about whether they'd used up all of the tools available to them, sitting on our hands at the final cabinet meeting, didn't say anything, didn't raise the fact that they already had a police plan in place.
Geoff, the fact that Rouleau said it was okay, your conclusion is that that does lower the threshold for future governments who may want to invoke it?
Well, I'm concerned about it because he gave the government a soft pass.
Yep.
And yet, I do believe that the act itself, which was drafted in 1988, does keep a very high threshold, as it should. So what I'm more concerned about is the precedent.
So should the government revise the act and legislate a higher threshold?
Well, Rouleau recommended...
For freedom, for liberties in Canada?
I think the existing threshold is good. He suggested modernizing the definitions of public order emergency, but keeping the threshold high. So I'm not so concerned about that.
Well, let's just keep freedom in the equation. Geoff Turner, thanks very, very much. 3 minutes. Thank you for contributing. We are almost out of the hole. People like the show, and we want to keep it on the air. So, press subscribe. Press PayPal. PayPal is really simply a credit card that you can pay with. And if you're writing a check or a letter, please put your address in, because I will send a letter to everybody who contributes money. Subscribe, PayPal. Thank you.